Everybody, I'm sorry for looking like a mess. I need to shave the beard and cut the hair, and I just been working at this thing like 9-10 hours a day the last like 2-3 days now. I've been really kind of pushing to get this thing done, at least the flooring. It's going to take years to be done, but anyway, I wanted to show you guys a little update on what I did. I'm actually really happy with the way this is turning out. So far, everything has worked out perfectly. I don't want to jinx myself because there's probably going to be something that's going to be off or whatever, but let me show you guys what I did. If you remember, last night I showed you this cross member and this cross member for the floor or the floor support or whatever. And what I did for them, you take a straight edge, and by the way, I did fix this. So as you know from the last video, there was a giant hole right here, and I had to cut all that out because this whole upper section was rusted completely. This part was okay, this part was bad, but the rest of it is okay. This is pretty badly pitted, but when I clean that up, if there's no holes, then I'm just going to paint it. But if there are holes, I'll just take some weld and just fill in the holes with weld, and just be done with that. And then down the road, then I'll take like a body filler and fill in those like pits or whatever and make it nice and smooth and paint it properly. So, but that's down the road. I don't really care. Just wanted to fix the main bad stuff on that. But anyway, as far as the cross members go, what I told you guys in the last video was you take a straight edge and you line the straight edge from this cross member right here. And this is your reference because the floor of the bed sits on top of this. Okay. So you take your straight edge and you measure all the way across. So the first cross member is here. The second one is this one. This one is lined up perfectly with that, and I showed you how I did that in the last video. Then you take your straight edge and you line it up to the next one over here. And if the straight edge is not, if it's up or down, then you adjust the height for these blocks that I made until it's level with itself. So this one and this one are straight and flush with each other. Now, this one right here, you take your straight edge and you line it over to the top of the frame right here. And in doing that, there was actually a 1/2 inch gap in the air. And that's actually the way Jeep did it from factory. There was like a 1/2 inch gap, maybe a 1 inch gap, but I think it was 1/2 inch. It has to be 1/2 inch because this lines up with the everything. So, and what Jeep did was they didn't bolt a cross member to the frame right here. It was actually floating. The cross member that went right here was like a Z shape, like a Z. And at the end of the Z, it was flat up against the floor, and it sat slightly above the frame right here. So I think what happened was if the floor flexes just a little bit, it'll flex down and then stop on the frame, and then it'll flex back up. I think that's the way Jeep intended it, and that's the way they did it. So the problem with this is there's only 1/2 of an inch in depth right there. And the cross member that's going to be sitting on the frame is going to be this one. And this one is 1 inch in depth. So that little conundrum is actually going to push the floor up 1/2 of an inch, and it's going to keep going up and up and up when it comes over here. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put this floor back on the truck, line it all up and everything, and then I'm going to have to take a pen and I'm going to have to mark where the floor sits on top of the frame right here, and then I'm going to have to pull the floor back off, and I'm going to have to cut at least a 1/2 an inch off of this, probably 3/4 of an inch, so it floats kind of like it did with Jeep. And I'm going to have to cut 3/4 of an inch off of this, if that makes sense. I don't want to cut too much off of it because it is only 1 inch, so I might just do 1/2 an inch, slightly over 1/2 an inch, and then stop. So that way it floats over the frame and it doesn't push itself up off the frame, because that's what it's going to do if I don't do that. So I have to lower that by 1/2 an inch. Now, the next one, you take your straight edge and you lay it flat on the frame. Be mindful, it has to be floating 1/2 an inch, but you want to be, accurate. So you lay it flat on the frame, line it up with this one over here. And the problem with this one is it's not 1.5 inches like this cross member. So even though the frame is flush with that and this mount, it can't only go up that 1 inch which this block is. If this block is 1 inch over here, so it can't just go up 1 inch. And the reason why is because this second cross member, which is again only 1 inch in depth, is going to be sitting over here. So that means if this thing has to float 1/2 inch, and I only put an inch block on this, then that means it's going to be flush. You don't want it to be flush. So that means this block has to be 1.5 inches, not 1 inch like that one, because it has to make up for that extra 1/2 inch that this cross member is missing compared to these U-channel. Does that make sense to you guys? It makes sense to me, but this is the way it has to be done. So in order to keep that 1/2 inch floating, this one has to be 1.5 inches. Now this mount right here and that mount are also level with each other. They have to be. That's the way they are. So because this one over here is using the U-channel, which is 1.5 inches, again, I only needed a 1 inch block, just like on this side over here. So when you put the 1 inch block on there, this technically should line up the body with the cabin if everything was measured properly. The problem is these corners right here. This is what supports the entire bed on this side. The cross member doesn't sit under the head right here. The head is just flat 16 gauge steel. It sits under this. And these little rectangle square tubes or whatever, they go all the way down, and they're 16 gauge. And because they're a square tube, they're strong, right? They have rigidity to them. And then the U-channel sits underneath them, and that's what supports the bed, okay? Now the problem is I had to cut off as much of the old floor that I could that was connected to this. I couldn't cut it all off because I can't get the angle grinder in there properly. It's just too hard to get in there. I tried it with a Dremel, but the discs that I have of the Dremel are not strong enough to cut 16 gauge steel, so I did the best that I could. So some of the original floor is still on that. Now, in order to support this, I had to put 16 gauge steel squares underneath this tubing, right? Just like the original floor was. And if you see, the original floor is right here, and then I got this new one underneath that. The problem with that is when I put a 1 inch block here, this actually pushes the bed up slightly by just a hair. And in doing so, and thankfully this Jeep actually has pinstriping, so because it has pinstriping, I can line up the body lines for this entire Jeep. Which is actually really nice and really helpful, because if this Jeep was just a one color like most of them are, without any pinstriping, I wouldn't be able to line up this bed properly. So if you look at the lines, you can see that the white line on the cabin on the right and then the white line on the bed on the left, they don't line up 100%. They're slightly off by just a few millimeters, which means that I need to take the block off of this thing, and I need to put it back on the vise and just cut a few millimeters off, and then put the block on, check the pinstriping again, and if it's enough or close enough, then just leave it alone, because if you cut too much of it off, then I have to make new blocks, so I don't want to do that. So, but I do want it to be even, because my OCD, once I get this thing going, and let's say I'm walking from the parking lot from the grocery store or something like that, right? I'm going to be looking at these pinstripes, because in my mind it's going to be like a set memory, and it's going to annoy the hell out of me. So I want them to be even with each other. Now you would figure, well, maybe the body mounts on the cabin are stagged or something like that, so the cabin is dropped, and that's possible for some of these Jeeps. But the body mounts, the rubber on these things, are actually in excellent condition. They're still thick, they're not squashed, they're not cracked. So the cabin is not dropped. It's just the bed is slightly too high. So and the reason why it's slightly too high is because I had to weld floor underneath floor. Does that make sense? So it raised it by just a few millimeters. So, but that just shows you that the measurements that I did with the straight edge and everything, and the tape measure and all that stuff, were pretty much perfect. They were on the money, and I'm really happy and kind of proud of myself. Actually, kind of shocked myself just a little bit. So, but anyway, once that's done, I'll weld these blocks to that. And then I'll weld the U-channel to the block, because this all is going to be welded together, because there is already a bolt right here and there's already a bolt right there. So if the bed ever has to come off, you just got to unbolt those. Now this one, obviously I already welded to here. And if you're wondering the reason why the lip is like ½ an inch off of the original mount is because I screwed up when I measured this. This bed floor is actually 98 inches. The Jeep one is 96 inches. So that means I need to cut 2 inches off the end right here, which is going to be on the head of the bed over there. And if I don't do that, then it's going to stick out by 2 inches, and that'll look weird, you know what I mean? So, but I measured this and this as it is now. And as it is now, that cross member would have actually sat like over here. But because I have to cut 2 inches of it off, that means it's going to be sitting more over here. So I wanted this block that I put to be slightly off, so that way the cross member is sitting mostly on this section right here. Does that make sense to you guys? And then to bolt it on, I'm just going to drill a hole through here and a hole through this one and just bolt it all together. So, and you guys already know about this one. I'm going to be doing the same thing. Drill a hole through it and then a hole through the frame and then bolt it on. So, so that's what I need to do next. I need to lower these blocks slightly and then weld it all together. And then I need to drill the holes in this one and bolt this cross member up. And then I need to drill the holes in that one. And then I need to lay the bed floor on, and I need to mark this cross member that sits on the frame so I can cut it and go from there. And then when that's done, then I'm going to weld the bed to the cross members. So I can't wait for this to be done. So it's getting there, and I'm actually really happy now that these cross members are in, and they actually worked perfectly. And what's really cool is I have one extra one. The extra one I kind of wanted to put right here to support that floor better, but again, I can't because the gas tank is right here, and this bed actually does have a cross member that's supposed to be right here. So as I mentioned before, or did I mention it to you guys, I'm going to be using a T-post there instead. The T-post is 3/16 steel. It's 2 times thicker than these U-channel, and the T-post is going to be sitting in here to support the floor on this side better. So, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, I'll let you guys go, and I hope you guys are enjoying this process. I'm actually having fun doing this, so it is getting there. I'll let you guys go. Have a great night.